This happened a few years ago. My brain is kind of fuzzy when it comes to stuff like this, so please forgive me if everything doesn't 100% add up. I can't exactly remember everything that happened exactly as it happened. For some context, I go to a lot of local heavy metal shows. I have a lot of friends who play in local bands, so I usually try to go to as many of their shows as I can to show my support. So, a few years ago, my friends invited me to a show at a bar. Now, this isn't one of those local bars where a small band would perform for a crowd of 30 people. It was more of a ballroom type place with a relatively large stage outside. I went and everything pretty much just went like any other show. Now, I have to emphasize that a lot of weird people go to these shows. I've seen people high on some pretty strong drugs, people attempting to spike your drink, and even seen some people behave like animals. There was this one guy who was extremely high to the point where he strongly believed that he was a dog. It may seem funny at first, but it could become creepy to a certain extent. There really isn't a lot of judgment in these areas. We don't care about your clothes, your skin color, your height, or how you talk. But I remember this one girl that really stood out at the show because she was wearing sunglasses that resembled the thing Geordi LaForge wore in Star Trek. She was a really short girl, probably 4'11" or maybe even smaller. She was with two guys, one who was drunk and literally falling everywhere, spilling his beer, and the other guy she was with didn't do much. He kept his hood up, stared at the ground, and really didn't move for the whole show. That stood out to me a lot because nobody, and I mean nobody, just stands around at these shows. Go hard or go home, I guess. I don't really remember what more they really did while we were there. My mom and I usually don't stay too late at these shows and just leave when our friends finish. Since my mom is older, she doesn't like to stay out too late. So we say goodbye to our friends and went outside to leave. As soon as I opened the door and stepped outside, I heard a girl screaming. I only heard it for a second before it stopped, but me and my mom just kind of looked at each other and shrugged it off because, like I said before, the people who come to these things are pretty weird. We started walking to our car and I heard it yet again. We start hearing a man shouting as well, saying stuff like, "You stupid girl, get back here, get your ass over here now," etc. We got in our car pretty quickly because we didn't know what was going on. So I had my mom drive around the back of the building towards the house. There was a car parked right outside that was still running. All of the doors on the car were open aside from the driver's side. The other man, the quiet one, was sitting in the driver's seat. As soon as we drove in front of their car, he grabbed the hood of his jacket and covered his entire face with it. That gave me chills. I knew something was terribly wrong right there in that moment. Why else would he cover his face? Why is he just sitting there calmly like that while his friends are chasing each other through a stranger's yard? While all of this was going on, I could still hear her shrieking in the background. I unbuckled my seatbelt and said, "Mom, I'm going back inside. I'm getting a friend and having him come out here with me to see what the hell is going on. We aren't leaving yet, I'm sorry." My mom hesitated but drove me back to the front door and parked. I got outside and grabbed my friend Jack. Jack is a very big guy, roughly 6'3" and maybe around 250 pounds, and has a very, very intimidating look. I told him what was going on and he gathered up a couple more of his friends along with grabbing the manager of the bar. She, the manager, insists that we hang back a second while she goes and figures out what was going on. We all hesitated with letting her go back by herself, but off she went. We waited by the door, and we could still hear the shouting and the screaming, except now the second man was out of the car. We then heard her scream again, louder than ever this time, and all just ran off in that direction. By now, the two men were standing by the car, looking at the ground, hands in pockets, looking like a pair of guilty dogs. The girl. She was lying face down on the ground, nails digging into the pavement, still screaming, shaking, and sobbing. The quiet guy kept mumbling things to himself, but I couldn't understand most of it because he was very quiet. But I do remember hearing things along the lines of, if she hadn't stayed quiet, everything would have worked out. She shouldn't have screamed. You shouldn't have let her out of the car. Meanwhile, the drunk friend kept telling him to shut up and be quiet. I remember him saying something about a plan, but I don't remember exactly what he said. Just that they had a plan and the girl screwed up. We never really found out what happened. The drunk friend made an excuse about them all just being a little too messed up, but that doesn't explain why he was chasing her, or why the quiet friend decided he needed to cover up his face like that when we passed him. Eventually, everyone dispersed. Me and my mom went home, and the next day I texted a few of my friends to see if they had any idea what had happened. They all kind of just said, she was too high, bad trip, she freaked out, etc. I don't know what they were up to, what they were doing, but I hope being caught in the act gave them enough sense to clean up their act a bit. I still think about that girl every now and then. I hope she's alright.
This happened last year after a concert, and yes, full disclosure, I am a total moron. I live in a real sketch town, and the venue was in a moderately safe part of town, bordering on the less ideal parts. I'd like to note that this happened around 11 p.m., so all the public transit was out of service for the night. We also did not drive downtown. I live about 5 miles from the venue, and my boyfriend had taken the Amtrak to visit me, and I don't have a car. I was with my boyfriend at the time, Marvin. Neither of us wanted to download the Uber app, for many reasons. So he decided to call a taxi for some ungodly reason. I was tired and didn't question him. I clearly remember him telling the guy on the phone that we wanted to pay with a card. This is important. So they said it would be about 15 to 20 minutes for them to arrive. We waited for about a half an hour, and then a taxi with the same logo of the company we called shows up. Marvin asked if the driver is ours, and he says, "Yeah, get in," and we follow suit. We explained to him that we were only able to pay with a card because neither of us carry cash. The driver seemed pissed off and told us that he would drive us to an ATM. We explained that we talked to the company over the phone and told them that we would be paying by card. He told us it was too late because the meter was already running and he wouldn't let us out. I start freaking out, especially when he started to drive the opposite direction he was supposed to. I kindly let him know that he was going the wrong way, since he seemed to have no idea where he was going. I live on a college campus, which is a landmark most locals know. He kept asking me where I lived and what exit he should get off at, and when I offered to route him, he got angry and ignored me. I tried to get his information, but he didn't have a taxi license on display like he's supposed to. I was too afraid to really talk back to this guy because he had such a brash demeanor. So I sent my location to my friends and told them what was going on and took a photo of the driver when he wasn't paying attention. Before you say anything, I know I'm an idiot, especially since I have a lot of experience living in cities and taking taxis. Anyway, we finally arrived at my apartment in one piece, but the meter was almost $30 at that point. So he demands we go to an ATM. Even though I wasn't sure if the campus had one, my boyfriend decides to go look for some reason. So I was left with this taxi driver, who left the meter running. So I was just playing on my phone, trying to ignore my gnawing anxiety attack. I asked him if he would roll down the window, and he's like, no. The doors were also locked inside, and when he moved up to another parking space, I almost knocked his ass out and ran away, thinking that he was leaving and trying to kidnap me. But of course, this only gets worse. He starts asking me pretty general questions, and actually isn't an asshole to me for once. He asked me how long I've been in school, what am I studying, you know, the usual stuff. Then he asked me if my boyfriend and I live together. I laugh and just answer, no, since he didn't even live in the same city as me. He then asks me if I want to marry my boyfriend, to which I give him a gentle, no. Then he starts asking me if we were having sex before marriage, and I straight up wanted to kill this dude. He proceeded to ask me if I was a virgin and how many boyfriends I've had, and then begins to tell me that I'm very pretty, along with other highly suggestive questions. Finally, Marvin comes back with the money. The fare is almost at $40, and my boyfriend just gives him two 20s, and the driver finally lets me out. And then the driver demanded a tip. And of course, my ever so classy ex goes, "Here's your tip, you greedy bastard," and flips him off and proceeds to cuss him out, while I'm literally having a full-blown panic attack. I want to add that the bill ended up being $35, so we did get a $5 tip, and I guess he wanted more. We are both fairly certain that he would have robbed us if we had cash. Also, as a note, we called the taxi place and asked what happened. They said our driver reported that we never showed up. He ended up sitting outside my building for 2 hours, while I was literally freaking out. I'm just glad I live in a high security apartment building.
About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the US with my girlfriend, who is still till this day. Her and I were the type of people who were into cars, movies, video games, and heavy metal. Anyway, we had been living in a small one-bedroom apartment at the time, as that was the most affordable for us, and buying a house in the state we lived in was majorly expensive. One night after I got home from one of my classes, I found out through a friend that there was a small little annual festival being held at our local park. I figured this would be a fun and nice opportunity to have a night out with her, so I told her, and she of course agreed. The park where the festival was taking place was about a 10-minute walk from our apartment building, so there was no point in driving it. We get to the park, and there's about 300 people or so walking around. The main attraction was a seemingly large, empty stage with big speakers and lights, indicating that some type of show would be going on soon. As mentioned before, we both loved this type of stuff, so we planned on staying until it ended, or at least until we got tired, as her and I both had classes in the morning. Within an hour, the so-called concert started, causing everyone to form a large crowd. There were 3 or 4 guys up on stage introducing themselves, talking about how they were performing shows at various small festivals like this one. Anyway, they started playing, and within about 20 minutes into it, my girlfriend said that she was going to use the restroom and told me to watch her spot until she got back. Being the overprotective boyfriend I was, I strongly recommended that I'd go with her, just to make sure she'd be safe. I'd like to mention that we lived in a part of the city that was notorious for gangs and drug dealers. Sometimes you'd even hear about a robbery or a kidnapping taking place nearby. However, she then gave me attitude and told me to just wait here and that everything would be fine. I don't want to cause a scene, so I let her go, while I continued to watch the band play. Fast forward till about 15 minutes later, my girlfriend still hadn't came back from the restroom, and that's when I start to become a little bit worried. I walk over to the restrooms, and there's about 15 people in line, and I'm trying to find her. I'm calling out her name, and that's when I hear a scream coming from near the main road. I could only describe it to be the scream of my girlfriend. At this point, I'm running while calling out her name, and as soon as I get to the sidewalk of the road, I was greeted to a horrifying scene. There were 2 rather large men holding my girlfriend. One of them was covering her mouth, while the other one was trying to grab her legs. I had my .22 that I always carried with me, but I knew that if I used it against them, that I'd find myself in a small concrete jail cell. So I did the smart thing, and got out my gun, and had them both at gunpoint. This was enough to make them flee down the road, disappearing into the night. My now traumatized girlfriend came running at me while falling into my arms. We called the cops, but nothing ever became of the men, and we never saw them again. From now on, I'm always with my girlfriend wherever she goes, and I always walk with her places during the night. Every time we have an argument, I stop and control myself, thinking about the time that I almost lost her. The world can be a dangerous place at times, so always be careful when going out alone. Make sure you stay with somebody.
Alright, so for some proper context, I'm a 25-year-old female that always enjoys going out and partying. Whether it be an actual party or going out for a drink with friends, I really enjoy doing that type of stuff. Anyway, on to the actual story. This happened around 6 years ago when I was in my final semester of college during the spring. During this time, I had a friend who we'll call Jay, who I basically considered as my best friend. We'd always spend as much time as we could together and always looked up to each other. Even though we were both dirt poor college students and both lived in relatively bad areas of our city, we always enjoyed hanging out together. Unfortunately, about a year ago, Jay was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer and it was an early stage. He unfortunately died a few weeks later because of the cancer, and I was devastated for a very, very long time. If I had known he would have been diagnosed with cancer, I would have married him in a heartbeat, but that's besides the point. Every moment we had together was amazing, but there was this one time we experienced something that I never forget. One time, him and I attended an annual musical festival in Miami Beach, which those of you who don't know is a music festival where you could see your favorite artists perform. We were both greeted to the smell of hot food from a nearby food stand and the chattering of people attending the festival, along with loud music. Fast forward to around 8 at night, we were walking around getting food as we'd be standing in a large crowd for 2 hours and we didn't want to be hungry. After hours and hours of listening to loud music through the night, it was officially 1 a.m. and we decided to call it a night and go home. However, Jay had mentioned that he wanted to see one last show as one of his favorite artists would be performing. Even though I was tired and wanted to get some rest, I didn't want to disappoint him, so I agreed and we went on our way to see one last performance. That was probably the biggest mistake of our lives. There were at least 500 to 600 people in this crowd, and there were multiple people drinking and talking while getting ready for the show to start. Within 10 minutes, the show finally began, and the crowd went wild as the drums and electric guitars started playing. At some point during the performance, I heard what sounded like a bang over the music and cheering. There were a few fireworks that would go off once in a while to create more excitement, so my mind immediately dismissed it as a small firework or a cherry bomb. However, a second bang went off, and that was when Jay and I started looking at each other with the "did you hear that too" kind of faces. All of a sudden, we hear multiple bangs coming from somewhere in the crowd, and that's when we start to realize that these sounds were nothing but gunshots. The crowd began to panic and the band had stopped playing. Cops and security had started to escort people out of the area while trying to find the shooter. The only problem was that the crowd was so huge, so it was basically trying to find a needle in a haystack. Jay and I tried our best to run with the crowd out of the festival while him holding onto my hand. We thank God made it out alive and immediately went to a nearby restaurant to stay safe. We didn't end up going home that night until around 4 a.m. and I didn't get a minute of sleep that night. The next day, the whole incident was aired on our local news station and I found out the horrifying details about it. At least 7 people had been shot dead and 5 being severely injured. Thankfully, police had identified the suspect, who was then arrested and had received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. This world is truly filled with a bunch of sick people who have the audacity to end up doing something horrible just to ruin everything for everyone. However, let my story be somewhat of a lesson for you. Don't go to overcrowded places late at night, and always tell someone if you see or hear something suspicious.